Support for Back to One from Committed Impulse, a high-performance training program for actors and entrepreneurs, taught by Josh Peiss. Discounts for Back to One listeners are available for upcoming courses. Go to committedimpulse.com/back-to-one and enter the code BACK-TO-ONE.
We all try to protect our children. We always want the best for them. But my view is, and it's certainly what I learned, because it happened to me all the time, was to fail. Just fail. And I think that we overprotect, naturally, because we're parents, we want to overprotect our kids. But in the end, there ain't anything wrong with failure. It's very helpful. And I've learned through failure. I've learned a lot through failure.
Filmmaker Magazine presents Back to One with Peter Rinaldi.
Brian Cox is an actor. He sat down with me in cyberspace to talk about the work.
When you land the role, you get the script. Is there a typical first step you take to embody the character?
Each role presents its own series of, series of opportunities in terms of the creative process. You never judge. So that's the thing that you must never do as an actor. You must never judge what you do. You must always accept. And it's the acceptance and it's the discovery of the inner life of something that is the most important part of it. So there's some parts that come easy, other parts which are more difficult. It also depends on the writer. It depends on how the writer writes, what the writer's thoughts are, what she or he, how fluid they are. The thing I love about the work is I love nuance. So what appeals to me in any role is the nuance. And also, I like roles that are not all revealed, so that you don't always know who they are. You learn who they are, or sometimes you're surprised by the fact that they end up being different from what you thought they were going to be. So you always, in that way, are keeping the audience on its toes. It's a bit like life, really. It is, my premise is always to go back to Shakespeare. Speak the speech I pray you as I pronounced it to you, trippingly on the tongue. And if you mouth it as many of your players do, I'd as lief the town crier spoke my lines. So the idea that Shakespeare has is that he is always about simplicity. It's always about the direct communication between the actor and the script. And don't overdo it, don't underdo it, just do the sense of what's being done. And, there are several techniques that are employed over the years. There's Meisner's technique, there's Strasberg, there are all the various techniques. But for me, it comes down to basic, because it's the language we use, English, subject, verbs, and object. What is the subject? What's the doing word? And what is the intention? Where am I going? And that's a given. That just like, that's like mother's milk. I don't even think about that anymore. I just do it. Because I was trained that way, and that's how I think. I think, where am I? Who is he? What is he doing? What's his? But also, at the same time, maintaining levels of allowing the audience to do the work, so you don't give too much in the wrong way.
Mm-hmm.
You allow the audience the latitude of experience who you are. So, for example, I played a character called Hannibal Lecter years and years ago. I sort of created the role. I was the first person to play it. And it's a great role. It has probably less than a quarter of an hour on the screen. The thing that sustains that role is just knowing, who is this man? And it's the mystery of who he is. You have to know who he is, but the audience doesn't necessarily have to know who he is. You have to allow the audience to make the discovery. And one of the things I think went wrong, I mean, I've got a huge respect for Tony Hopkins, and I think he was fantastic in Silence of the Lambs. But what happened to the role eventually is that Tom Harris fell in love with him, and he started to over-explain the character. So the mysterious element of the character was lost. Now, audiences love mystery. Doesn't matter whether it's comedy or tragedy or drama or anything. They love mystery. They love knowing the reveal of the character. Oh, it's that. Oh no, it's oh no, well it's oh no. Oh. So they're going on. Boom, 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 boom. It unfolds. And that to me is what's great about my job, is that I get a chance to do that. And I get a chance to explore things in that way. And it's also truthful, because I don't know you. This is the first time we've ever met, so I don't know actually what goes on with you. I don't know what your predilections are. I don't know what your, I don't even know what your sexual gender is. I don't know if you're straight or gay or what have you. But so you start with a blank canvas, and you start to build up what these things are and how these things motivate the role. And I find that is, to me, the sort of overriding factor. I get smells and tastes of jobs. I look at a role and I think, yeah, this is going to work. And I'll look at another role and say, yeah, this needs some effort. I'm going to have to do something with this. I'm going to have to make it in a way. I'm going to have to find a way of de-escalating it, perhaps, or doing the opposite. So that, and that's the challenge. Then you get gifts, like Logan Roy in Succession is a gift, because he's a man of a certain standing, and his character is so clear in terms of his avarice and money and all that, but he's also mysterious. You don't really know who he is, and you don't really know what his bottom line of his motivation is. And that is the bit that I keep saying, don't ever reveal that. I don't want to know that. I mean, maybe on the 5th series you can reveal it, but keep it that we don't really know where he is. I mean, it's like I said to Jesse, I said, does he love his children? And he said, oh yeah, he does love his children. I thought, oh, that's good, because he loves his children, therefore he doesn't declare it. He doesn't declare his love for his children. It's something very internal. So that there's nothing, in fact, he almost goes the opposite from loving. So that, so you're getting a counter tension there. And that's wonderful, because then that gives you incredible latitude in terms of playing. You understand what I mean?
Oh, yes. And that brings up a couple things. I mean, the smile and at the very end, this is so interesting now, because that smile revealed, like you're talking about, a mystery. It's like the sourdough starter that he couldn't understand in the very first episode as a gift. The watch that he didn't care about. Those showed us two things about him. He doesn't even care about material things anymore, or like these odd, heartfelt things. So then that set up this whole person. But then at the end, that smile revealed to me that there is something that could be gifted to him still. And it's this moment, his son can do this. And that made me feel like, wow, now I was given something about this character that I wasn't given at all before, really. And now this sets up a whole new thing for the rest of does that make sense?
You're absolutely onto it. That's exactly right.
And the idea, though, that, and correct me if I'm wrong, you didn't really quite get that as an actor, because you're not getting all of the whole round thing of a character until it's just the nature of the way television shows are made, right?
And it's also the great thing about television, and the great thing about, from an actor's point of view, when you're doing a play or even a film, you've got a beginning, middle, and an end. So that there's a sort of graph to where you go. There's a graph of it. With Shakespeare, Hamlet, his father's died. He's got to find out, what happened to him, and then the ghost. I know he's been murdered. I know, what am I going to do? I've got to deal with it. Do I want to live? Do I really want to be here? So all of that's going on. but it's got a shape. Boom, boom, boom. Now, in the long form television, it's all about middle. It's all about it's all about the mundane, the kind of the en passant element of life that is going through. It's not, and then these little incidents, these little flags along the way that are going, I see where I'm heading in this direction. And with Logan, that's exactly what happened. With Logan, he starts off, he has this horrific stroke. He recovers to a whole different sensibility. He is basically a misanthrope. He basically doesn't like humanity. He feels that the human experiment, I mean, he and I agree on that. It's a bit of a disappointment. And therefore, but his children he loves, but they are a total disappointment. They are completely without any dimension to him, because they behave in so predictable a fashion in terms of their bad behavior and everything, and he just goes, well, that's it. But then the eldest boy, or the second eldest boy, Kendall, the guy he's been training, suddenly gives him a shock. He says, I just don't know if you've got it in you. I don't know if you can cut it. It's not your fault. It's just the way you're made. And of course, that has a galvanizing effect on the boy. And he does this wonderful act of treachery. So in a kind of way, it's a joke. In a kind of way, he goes, well, I should have known he would go for it in a way.
Yeah.
It proves my point. But at the same time, he says, well, maybe something will come out of this. Maybe lesson will be learned. Something will, maybe this boy will be able to finally throw off all the kind of stuff, all the shite that he's got, and stand on his own 2 feet, finally. Mm-hmm. And we shall see whether that's possible.
And it feels like, and you've said this a number of times, like that this character feels like it's just a game.
Yeah.
And if it's just a game, then his son finally played a hand or played a move that was so good for the game. Yeah.
No, it is a game. I said that earlier on. I remember when we got to episode 7 of the first series, and we were doing with that wonderful scene with Griffin Dunn. And that scene, and when they have the big family around, he comes back and he's stoned, and and it is the game. They don't understand it's a game. And of course, the deeper element about that, the sort of existential element of that, is that life is a game. It is a game. It's not necessarily a win or lose game. It's just a playing game that we play. And of course, that's what actors do. We play. And I've been thinking about it. I don't want to be too pie about it, but I've been thinking about the breakdown of religions. And I just think that the one thing we do is we do humanism. Actors portray people. Mm-hmm. And we show what humanity is up to, what they're doing, who they are. The only person would be really impossible to play, because he's so two-dimensional, and it would be impossible to play him, is Donald Trump. Nobody could play Donald Trump because he's so badly written.
That's a very good point. That's a good point. People can mock him, impersonate him, but you can't play him. That's a good point.
No, because he's so badly written. It's just incredibly badly written.
Yes.
And you're going, This is not a good part. He is a walking bad script.
You've spoken a lot about your early education, and the more I hear you talk about it, the more fascinated I am about how you could latch on to Shakespeare so easily after the way you describe it. Like, you weren't even reading as a teen. Like, text was not a thing in your life. Can you just talk about how that happened?
I remember going to see Shakespeare when I was at the school, and we went to see a school, I think it was the Henry IV Part 1, and I didn't understand a word of what was going on, apart from a little bit of Falstaff. I just didn't get it. I go, oh God, what's all this about? And then, but I was just fascinated by the whole acting thing. So when I started in my hometown rep, which is where I began in Dundee in Scotland, and I was very, very blessed because I went into a situation and I was like a open book. I was just observing, taking everything in, and I was doing what I was going to be doing. I'm so blessed at the age of 15 to be in this situation. I was just working in the theater. I was doing everything. I was the worst stage manager. I was terrible at doing stuff. But I did play small parts, and I was good in my small parts. So I was kept on, because my stage management skills were awful, just awful. But what I gained, what I thought was when I went to drama school, and then I saw the whole thing of texts and actors dealing with texts and actors dealing with script and actors learning scripts, because in those days, in my hometown, the rep was fortnightly. So you changed the play of a fortnight. So you had 2 weeks to learn a play, and they did phenomenal. And there was an actor who was in the company who became famous. Sadly, he's dead now, and his fame sort of faded because of his disturbed personality. I can only describe it as. And that was an actor called Nicol Williamson. And Nicol was there, and he was this sort of cadaverous, thin guy. And he did this amazing range of work and was just dazzling in what he could do, the scope of what he did. And I could see the potential as an actor of being different, of understanding the differences, that you're not locked into one image, that you're constantly reinventing. It's like that wonderful film of Picasso when he's painting away and he says, and he kept, leave it, no, oh no, leave that, no, and he keeps redoing it and redoing it and redoing it. And actors are a bit like that as well. They do that in preparation for what they do. So the script becomes an organic thing which you imbue into yourself. And when I got to drama school, I was given the opportunity to read, really, which I hadn't read anything. I mean, I'd read some things, but there was a library, and there were books, and I started to read, and then I started to read scripts. And then I got the notion that, there's some really great stuff out there, And then I'm not so much a great reader now because I've got too much to learn at times, but I became a great reader at that point throughout and so autodidact. I mean, I'm total autodidact. I left school when I was 15 and my education was a disaster. I then I did my first job in Edinburgh, and then I met this wonderful director called Peter Hughes, who then invited me to Birmingham Rep. And he was Yorkshire, he talked like that. And he was very down to earth. He was very but he was a great Shakespeare scholar. He did the first ever television Ages of Kings way back in the 60s, which you can still see. And it was all in the studio and absolutely wonderful. And you had Sean Connery playing Hotspur and, amazing stuff. And he did that, and he made it all approachable. He made Shakespeare, he brought it into the living room, and he made it clear. So I was then lucky to work with him. And he said to me, so Thorlov, what do you want to do? What is your ambition? And he thought he had been a friend of Albert Finney's, so he kind of thought I was very like a young Albert Finney. He saw that correlation, which flattered me because Albert was the reason I finally realized when I saw him on Saturday night and Sunday morning when I was 14, I suddenly realized, I don't have to be an American to be an actor. I can be a British person and be an actor because all my acting was related to Americans, which was alien. But when I saw Albert, I just thought, wow, I mean, it was like a Damascus moment for me. So Peter had known Albert, and he invited me to Birmingham. He said, what do you want to do? What do you want to play? And I went, I don't know, Hamlet. And he said, all right. I said, what else? I said, maybe, I don't know, Peer Gynt. Oh, yeah, all right. What else? I said, well, maybe Iago. Okay. And I listed off these plays. The only one I didn't do was Hamlet. I played Iago. I played Peer Gynt. I played Bolingbroke and Richard II. I played Orlando, As You Like It. And this was all before my 22nd birthday. So that kind of experience, you can't buy.
Yes.
You just can't buy it. I mean, I was so blessed to be put through the ringer. You know, I wasn't, I'm sure I wasn't good at any of the roles, but I did them. You know, I did, as I say, I did, the first season I did Bolingbroke and Orlando, and then the second season I did Iago and Mercutio. I played Mercutio as well, and then I played again. So it was a fantastic time for me. And just my voice, all my instruments were being used. And Shakespeare, of course, is the great, you know, that really is the one writer that you do use your instrument. And then I also had this thing that I got from Peter, which was this sort of psychological thing of, you know, I remember we worked at Gambon, Michael Gambon, in those days, because you couldn't do it now, but he played Othello. And Michael and I, we used to rehearse in Peter's office. And he said, you see, lovies, it's an office. I mean, you know, Othello's probably, because he's a Moor, he's probably had the desk taken out, but he's got a big carpet, so he's working on his carpet. He said, and you've got your desk, and you're there, and it's just an office. You're lads in an office working together. And of course, doing that, he completely rooted the scene. Rooted it. So all that language was rooted in something very kind of mundane, you know, working away. Did Michael Cassio, when you moved my lady, know of your love? Oh, why he did? Why does that? No, nothing but for satisfaction of my thought. Why have I thought of Iago? There's nothing, my lord. And it creeps in you. That, you know, there's just the way Iago operates. He's just an amazing character. And of course, it was just revelatory as from an acting point of view of what you could do and where you didn't have to rise. And of course, the work is, the emotion is all Othello. I mean, he's a raw piece of raw meat, and Iago just has to point his finger and it goes in that direction. So that was just through the sheer practical experience of playing those plays, I learned about the language, I learned about all of the stuff, and, you know, that I was then able to do in later life. The thing that happened to me was that I became very part of that kind of British, almost English thing, because I'm a Scot, so I'm like Tony Hopkins. You know, we both have problems with being Celts. Tony had it, I have it, you know, with the English, as it were. And so I was able to kind of operate and learn a lot. But I was also very, what was the word? I was very sort of overly contained in a way. A little bit, not stiff, but a little bit sort of not quite physically free. And then in the early 80s, I had this, I did the Scots play, and we did it in India. And I had just done I just played De Flores in The Changeling, which is a great role, and it's a great play. And he's this ugly character who's in love with this woman, and he will murder people on her behalf. And I had quite a success in it. And I then went to the National, and I played Brutus opposite Gielgud, and it was all right. It was not a very good production, directed by John Schlesinger. But then I did this tour in beginning 1980. I knew there was something in me that was a little bit thwarted. I was playing in Delhi, and it was a fairly big theatre, and we played it early in the morning and stuff. And I had this dresser, this young woman, who she was 16, and she was a Kathak dancer. She danced the Kathak, all that stuff. She did all that. And she's funny because she said to me one day, she said, "Mr. Cox, would you mind if I say something?" And I went, "Oh, okay, what is it?" She said, "I see you, and I think you're," she was very praiseworthy. She said, "but I feel you're repressed." And I said, oh, repressed. I said, well, I don't see that. And she said, no. She said, maybe repressed is not the word, but I feel you want to move. I feel you want to expand, and you can't. And you should just do it.
Wow.
You should just do it. And I went, really? She said, yeah, just do it. I mean, because I know it's you. Forgive me for saying this, but I do know it's you. And I said, okay, I'll have a go. So I used to get us to stand in the wings, and I would do those big speeches at the beginning of that play, and all those. I can't quote them because it's bad luck, but I was doing all those speeches. And then she would come off, and I would say, so I couldn't even remember her name. I said, so what did you think? She said, further, go further. And eventually, and I started, it released me in a way.
Amazing.
But also it plugged me into my Celtic tradition, my vaudevillian tradition, which was, you know, I worked with these actors you don't know, you wouldn't know, but I mean, great actors, Scottish actors like Fulton Mackay, Duncan McRae, Callum Mill. These are wonderful, wonderful, great, and they were very physical actors, they had this real extraordinary physical sensibility about their work. And I suddenly realized that I had kind of sat on all that in order to be English, in order to receive pronunciation and all of that. I kind of thwarted that. And then it was like several years later when I did Titus Andronicus and worked with the great liberator Deborah Warner, that I was able to release that. I was able to reclaim my Celtic heritage through my work. And it was an astonishing, I mean, you know, and it's part of the journey that you take as an actor. If you really like the job and you want to do the job well, you have to challenge yourself in some way, and you have to put up with the difficulties of your own shortcomings at times. You know, what makes you stop, what seizes you up, what makes you not be free. You know, and that's what you love. And when you meet when you work with somebody like Vanessa Redgrave or Judi Dench, I mean, they've learned that freedom, which is, I mean, Vanessa. I did Coriolanus with Vanessa, and she played Octavia, and her reading of the verse was so immediate and so original and she kept it at a low key, and it was astonishing. And it was, again, I kept saying, that's how you do it. And I pinched it from her. I said, okay, I'm going to do that.
And it's what's amazing about hearing you talk about this, and what's also very frustrating to me, is that it just sounds like this is something you build over time. It's such an experience thing. If you want to really improve, you just have to keep going and keep putting yourself in different situations.
Absolutely. It's a constant learning curve. I mean, the problem in my profession is that you know, and I've witnessed it. You know, I did very well as a young actor. You know, I did reasonably well. I didn't get the starring stuff. And in a way, I'm so glad I didn't, because I've seen young actors come and go. You know, they've bloomed too early, and their time has passed, and they're not doing it anymore. Some of them are no longer with us. Some of them have died. But I always knew that I wanted to be in it for the long haul. I always knew that I wanted to be doing it at the age I am now, and even older. You know, because I just know there's just so much that I'm learning about how it works, how the inner motivation works towards it. And that's what I value. That's really what I value.
We'll be right back after this.
If you've been listening to Back to One, you've heard me talk about Josh Pais and Committed Impulse. Josh is an incredible actor from Joker, Motherless Brooklyn, Ray Donovan, Touchy Feely, Synecdoche, New York. The list goes on and on. He's the ultimate, that guy, you know, the ultimate scene stealer. And you have to listen to his episode of Back to One. It's filled with gold for the actor. He teaches a class called Committed Impulse, which uses an approach designed to bring spontaneity in the form of truth plus impulse to the work. It's not just for actors, entrepreneurs, public speakers, and anyone seeking to add a blast to their creative life. Well, now, of course, Committed Impulse has had to move online, which is like maybe the best news since lockdown, because now you don't have to be in New York City or Los Angeles to take part. There's 2 upcoming classes happening. The first is a 4-week live digital character lab in July 2020. That one explores the inner atomics and other Committed Impulse tools used to build and fully inhabit a character. It's also going to explore sub-personality work so that you can unearth parts of yourself that often lay dormant. Then there's a live digital masterclass happening in the fall. It starts with the beginning of Committed Impulse and builds from there. That's a great place to start if you're completely new to Committed Impulse. It focuses on building an understanding of the tools from the ground up. If you listen to Josh's episode, you'll hear this is a guy who's not just teaching these things. He's using them in his own work, adjusting them, adding to them as his experience grows, and then he gives it back to his students. And you can see it working in his performances. The exciting thing is Back to One listeners get $25 off any Committed Impulse class. Go to committedimpulse.com/back-to-one and enter the code BACK-to-one. That's committedimpulse.com/back-to-one and enter the code BACK-to-one. Can you describe the traits of a director that worked best for you? And is that something that has changed over the years?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's less of them. Quite a lot of them are, the great ones for me are dead now. And I like young directors because I like their rawness. And I actually like their sense of the fact that, there is an element of failure in what they do, so I kind of appreciate that. But I've worked with people like Lindsay Anderson, who were impeccable, and Lindsay did give me the greatest note ever when I was working on a play with him, and he said, "Oh, Brian, don't just do something, stand there."
Love that.
I mean, I went, "What?" And then I knew what he meant. Don't work, don't think. And then I had great philosophical directors like Marianne Elliott, the very gifted theatre director now. Her dad, who was called Michael Elliott, and he was a bit of a genius. I did Moby Dick for him. I played Captain Ahab, and tragically, it was the last thing he did. And that was an astonishing experience, sailing the Pequod and doing that whole thing and miming, doing all the harpooning and all that. It was extraordinary experience, absolutely extraordinary experience. So, I mean, I've been very lucky. Those are the directors that that meant a lot to me. And they're very hard acts to follow. So I would never pitch a young director up against that because A, they haven't got the experience. And also, we live in a very comfy, cozy time. These people came out of war. They came out of social unrest, and that's why the 60s to me is still one of the great periods, because it's the period of social mobility when people moved in a way that they haven't moved before, and I found that really quite something. That was very exciting to me. I was a kid from Dundee. I was ill-educated, but I got into a drama school and I was given a grant and I was given expenses, and the government looked after me. Said, "Okay, you're an artist. Get on with it." And that doesn't happen now. No. We don't do that. We question. We don't allow people to start working on their destiny.
Yes.
And I was very blessed in that way. So with directors, the best directors are the ones who don't get in your way. The best directors are the ones who actually create the environment where it's almost invisible. You don't know what's going on, and you realize, my God, this is incredible. Or directors who genuinely have a vision. But there are so many directors, the conceptual directors, who I just can't be dealing with, because it's all about their concept. They see the play in that way, and it's got to be, I want this, and I'm going to have it raining that, and you go, what about the play? What's going on? So there's a lot of that crap that goes on, and you see it, and of course they become very successful. because people love that, that sort of influence of the Germanic theater where everything is high art, and I think to me, it's just high bullshit.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I mean, sometimes I see some classics and I'm like, I would love just people to just do this, to try and really dive into this again in just a real way. No scenery or anything. Just do it. It still hasn't been done maybe in the best. Yeah, it still hasn't even been done maybe in the best way that it could be yet. We don't know. Why dip in that like you're talking about?
Yeah.
You've talked about the idea of it being kind of like an exorcism, when, especially in relation to Logan Roy, like the idea that like, yeah, you don't have to have this guy's politics. You don't have to have this guy's attitude toward, everything. But there are certain things that are within the character that are within you. And the idea is sometimes they are repressed, or sometimes you don't want them to come out. But the idea is that it's fun to have them come out, and then you can leave them. I know a lot of people, even people I've talked to, they can't really leave them after they're done with the role.
I mean, there's a whole style of acting which has been, where you get the, that it has to be for the actor some kind of religious experience, and I can't be doing with that. I mean, I really. It's hard enough without having to do that as well. But I see actors go through hell, put themselves through hell. And I just say, give yourself a break. It's unnecessary. You don't need to do that. You're very good in the role. And you'll be very good anyway. You don't have to do all that stuff. But there's a tradition, it's a tradition of actors, carrying the characters home with them. And, I mean, there's an element of that. There's always an element of that. But let it be an element. You have to keep fresh, and you have to constantly have showers, be showered and clean to receive. If you've got so much stuff hanging over you, you're no longer a clean sheet.
I like that.
You're already spotted. You've already got hand marks all over you. And I think that the actor has to be, there's a lightness about acting. There's a sort of delicacy about it that you've really got to understand that and let that happen so that you don't get bogged down. I mean, when I think of the characters, if I took on the characters I played, I'd be round the bend. I mean, I've thought about playing Hannibal Lecter. I'd be, or even Logan Roy. I mean, those characters would just drive you insane.
Yes.
They're creations, and they have to be seen as creations.
Yes. Something happened to me recently. I just want to run it by you. I didn't have a chance to run it by any other actor yet. Somebody wanted me to fill in for a part, act in something, and it never happened. But for 3 days, I had these pages, and I learned so much from just panicking about these pages. And one of the things I learned is the idea of a director giving a line reading, of course, is a giant no-no, right? But I was realizing that I was giving myself a line reading moment to moment, meaning as soon as I read it, I had this idea of how it should sound without really examining enough into the character. So I started with that. And I kept I have to almost always battle against the line reading I was giving myself. Does this make any sense to you?
Yes, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, a lot of actors do that. Some actors have built careers out of that. Or actually, giving a turn of phrase and a turn of way. But, the thing about line readings is interesting, because I remember years and years ago, I worked with a wonderful director when I did The Changeling, funny enough. A director called Peter Gill, and I would have some struggle with lines, just the sense of lines. And I would say, give me a line reading. Tell me how to say it. And he would tell me how to say it. And I remember there was one line that I had in this play, and I overcomplicated it. And I remember, and the line was, she smells all amber, which is what I had to say about Beatrice too. She smells all amber. And I couldn't for the life of me say it, because I didn't know how to say it. And it was just simple. She smells all amber. But I was going, she smells all amber. And I was doing, and Dave and Peter just said, that's the line. And I said, okay. And I said it like that, not even knowing why I was saying it like that. I just said, okay, I'll say it like that. And then in the middle of the run, I went, oh, it's so simple. She smells all amber. It's just, you know, I had built it up into a kind of thing. And you see that a lot of the time.
Yes.
I mean, one of the great speakers of verse, to my mind, I mean, apart from Gielgud was a great speaker of verse, but he sometimes got too florid and too carried away. But when he was in his simple, he was amazing. But the person who I really loved was Paul Scofield. Scofield had a really way of talking that we had this strange voice anyway, but you just were mesmerized by him, you know, just his simplicity, his sheer simplicity, and his relationship to a text.
Now, on Succession, I've heard that there's room for improvisation that happens.
Yeah, it's a misnomer, really. There is elements of improvisation, but it's usually like the bread around a sandwich. You know, it's either the ciabatta or the olive bread or what have you. It's not the sandwich.
Right.
The sandwich is the script. But we have sometimes a way in. We'll improvise. Right. But we never ever go away. The
from
script
the meat.
Is, you know,
the meat is there. Yeah.
The writing is sacrosanct, and that is clear. You know, because those guys and gals, they work for months. Those guys and gals on the script, and so but occasionally what we do is we'll get into it by doing that, and then getting into the meat of the thing.
I see. Yeah.
And, I mean, the other thing too, you've seen for instance, you see people who've developed, I mean, wonderfully, incredibly, like Kieran Culkin. Kieran Culkin's amazing. He never improvised in his life.
Wow.
Never improvised once in his whole life before we did the show.
Wow.
And they also do this thing of giving you alts. They'll give you a list, you know, because a lot of the writers are very comedy based.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of gag elements. So they'll give you pages of alts. So they'll give you, they'll give you alts. Sometimes I've seen Kieran on one script had 5 pages of alts that he would do, you know, in each take.
I'd love to see a tape of all of them from that guy. That's just amazing. I would love you to tell, as a way to end the story around, say your prayers and be a good actor.
That was my friend Fulton Mackay. You know, where did you find that?
Some interview you did. I think it's really important.
Oh, God, it's so important. You know, I was a young, ambitious actor, you know, and I wanted to be a star. And I was young. I was in my 20s. And Fulton was this wonderful. Have you ever seen Local Hero, the film Local Hero?
Yes.
He plays the old man who owns the beach.
Yes.
And he picks up the sign. He said, "Oh, you see, you'd admit, you know." He was a genius actor, and sadly died actually far too young, in his early 60s. And he was like my spiritual father. And I adored him. I absolutely adored the man. And he was he was very Scottish, and he had this rigor about him. He had this absolute rigor as an actor, and he was brilliant. I mean, he did all kinds of range of work that nobody would know. He does a TV show which is called Porridge, and he plays actually he was called Mackay, which is his name, and he plays Mackay the warder, and he's wonderful in it. So Fulton, you know, I'm going, you know, I'm trying, you know, when you're young and then, you know, you've got a bit of limelight, you're trying to exploit it, and you're saying, oh yeah, maybe I should be, you know, and I did have that ambition, you know, I want to be a star, you know, I want to be, you know, I think it comes to us all in one way. And he just said, Brian, he said, you're always worried about being a star. He said, don't worry about that. He said, just say your prayers and be a good actor. And it was the best advice ever, because I thought, God, and it was such a relief, because I was like, I didn't know what to feel, you know, because I was thinking, you know, because you get caught by things, you know, things attach you like barbed wire catch you on the sleeve of your jacket, and things catch you like that. And I had that thing when I was a kid, you know, that I get, because I was, you know, I was fairly naive in many ways, you know, which was my strength as well as my weakness. But when Fulton said that, he just said, just say your prayers and be a good actor. And it was the best advice. And it's, you know, it was great advice. And I do. I say my prayers and try to be a good actor.
Brian Cox, I have two last things to say to you. One is an homage and one is very genuine. Fuck off and thank you.
You're welcome. Take care.
Back to One is a production of Filmmaker Magazine, which is a publication of IFP, the Independent Filmmaker Project. Listen to back episodes of this podcast at filmmakermagazine.com or wherever you get your podcasts.